Well, welcome to the session on the DesignLights Consortium and the network controls and how they could impact, and the utility incentives and how they can impact what your thought process and actions will be in the future. There have been so many changes that have occurred over the last decade or two in lighting. When I started in lighting was 1989, and that was basically the advent of the electronic fluorescent ballast, which was a major evolutionary step in lighting, going from magnetic ballast to electronic ballast for fluorescent. And then things sort of slowed down. Yeah, we improved the efficiency by 3 or 4%. Lamps got a little bit better, but these were incremental gains in efficiency. Dimming fluorescent ballasts, particularly electronic ones, became more popular, but expensive as hell, and limited in terms of dimming range. You had to keep the cathodes hot, so the efficiency wasn't as good as an instant start, all sorts of little things. Then we'll talk about what happened after that in terms of not an evolutionary step, but a revolutionary step into LEDs. And along with that came the nonprofit DesignLights Consortium with the initially just a qualified product list of components, and then last year with the network lighting controls and a network lighting controls qualified product list. I ran across this. Room is equipped with Edison electric light. Do not attempt to light with a match, so you know when this came about, right after gas lights. Turn the key on the wall by the door. And the fine print says, the use of electricity for lighting is in no way harmful for health, nor does it affect the soundness of sleep. So I try to figure out when this occurred, in the early 1900s probably, or the late 1800s. But nevertheless, the world has changed since then. So we talk about the dark ages of the early 1990s, when we started to shift from supply side electric power and energy to more of a demand side management. The state utility commissions began to mandate some sort of DSM, demand side management programs, in their areas. For the most part, consumers were paying for this with a small incremental charge on their electric bill. And then the money was used for incentive programs to improve efficiency, which meant reducing the need for generation and better air quality, et cetera. Now here's a challenge. Most of the electric utilities each had their own unique program qualification requirements. Some were very simple and straightforward. The most anal, anybody here from Con Ed? Good, I can talk about them. The most anal or onerous one that I dealt with was Con Ed, where they only updated their qualified products list twice a year. Now you're in a market that's growing, changing daily. I was with Motorola Lighting at the time, one of the folks who founded the thing, and I get a call from a distributor, or a lighting manufacturer rather, in the New York City area. Anybody here from the New York City area? Anybody ever dealt with somebody from the New York City area? What's the first thing they do? They get right in your face. And this guy was right in my face because he had expected to get $50,000 in rebates, but our products weren't on Con Ed's list. Yeah? What do? You talk nice to Con Ed. Plead almost, but talk nice. So finally, they called up and said, be in our office Tuesday at 10 a.m. Okay, what's going to happen? And I figured, well, okay, we'll get there. They're going to give me a hard time. Then they're going to say, for this one time only, we'll make an exception and allow the rebate. And then they're going to go back and say, maybe 6 months isn't right. We need to change our program, which is exactly what happened. So the manufacturer got us $50,000. I got to keep my job, and everybody was happy. Meanwhile, my files grew. more and more electric utilities started having demand-side programs. I had 2 file drawers full of files, trying to keep track of each one. It's a disaster. And of course, these were primarily component-based fluorescent lamps and fluorescent ballasts. So this is where I had the problem, and it almost looked like this. You can envision that as trying to keep track of where you're going and not knowing where you're going to end up. Well, I had that problem with all these files, just trying to keep them straight and keep them current. So we finally moved into what I call the Enlightened Age of the mid-2000s. And we had the evolution of light. It started all the way from the sun through fire, candles, kerosene, into different versions of incandescent, compact fluorescence, and then eventually LEDs. So the good news, the world of LEDs, it reduces power, reduces energy, obviously. Not only are they easily dimmable, they love to be dimmed. Now, the dimmable characteristic opened the door to control systems, because now you can do so many things with LED-operated systems. So the DesignLights Consortium started out as a project of NEEP, which is the Northeast Energy Partnership, Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnership, out of New England, out of Boston. And then the first of this year, it became an independent, what's called a IRS 501c3, which means they don't pay taxes because they don't make a profit. They have at least break even, maybe a little surplus, but not a profit. Now that's a little different. Anybody here belong to a trade association? I suspect this meeting is being held by an association that's a 501c6, which is a little different, but anyway, it's free. So they came out initially in 1998, what they call the know-how series, was just educating people about fluorescent and the changes. Then in 2006, they came out with the high-performance T8 project. T8 lamps, by this time, are really starting to take over from T12 lamps, electronic ballasts, but there's a gigantic installed base of T12 and magnetic systems, so they created the high-performance system to make it easier for people to specify. And they had a whole series of things that occurred. In 2008, they decided to have a centralized list of fixtures for the incentive programs. 2010, they had the first version of the QPL. It had 8 categories, 200 products, and 50 manufacturers. Started small. 2 years later, they held a first stakeholder meeting to get input from manufacturers, from users, so that they could have a more well-rounded set of requirements. And then in 2013, they're up to 25,000 products on the QPL. That's getting pretty good. So they got better. They introduced a new website, a new database. Oh, they revised the technical requirements, and what happened? 16,000 products are delisted at the end of the year, dropping the level to 30,000. Why were they delisted, or why did they revise the products? Because technology was changing. Technology was improving. Efficiency, efficacy was improving. Raise the bar. Well, they allow a year of grace, raise the bar. If manufacturers haven't updated their products, they get delisted. Then in 2014, now they're up to 50,000 units. So what happened between 2014 and 2017? Well, we went from 50,000 units to 295,000 products listed on the QPL. Now that gets a challenge just to find something. And went from 750 manufacturers to 1,800 manufacturers participating. And to try and simplify it, the 37 product application categories were reduced to 7, with, within those categories, 71 primary uses. And of course, because we now have almost 300,000 units, searchable, sortable, web-based database tool. You can search by manufacturer, you can search by product type, all sorts of good things. The DLC members are electric utilities, regional, state energy efficiency organizations throughout the U.S. and Canada. And they provide both financial support, guidance, and technical expertise in developing the initial drafts and revisions of the specifications. So for those utilities and energy efficiency organizations, there's some benefits. Obviously, they benefit to the whole QPL. They don't have to maintain individual databases. They can draw upon each other's technical expertise. And having sat in on some of the WebEx calls, it's a good group. They cooperate with each other. They share information. They share technology. They have a common effort. And they're helping to shape things. And you can get reliable energy savings and robust relationship with industry. That's still a goal. It's a rocky goal. Industry has one view of things, and I grew up in industry. And when you make a product, you'd like to keep making that same product. You don't want to bother changing it. So industry doesn't necessarily like the annual revisions, but now they at least have a voice in what is going to go into those revisions. So you can see the yellow represents DLC members. There are 85 members representing 100 utilities. And that's growing. They're always recruiting more utilities. And some of these members, like Bonneville Power, the National Grid, they represent a number of different electric utilities. You can see a good sample of that. And you've got small utilities in here from Cape Cod, that's the actual utility, to ComEd in Chicago, where I live, SMUD out in the West Coast, Saskatchewan Power, Hydro-Quebec, BC Hydro, and the list goes on and on, Seattle City Lights. So it covers, as we saw on this, up and down the West Coast, almost the entire East Coast, the whole North sector, and some holes still in the lower Midwest and out in the far West. So hopefully those will be filled. So it starts out with general applications, the minimum light output in lumens, and then what is the minimum efficacy that it must meet. Minimum warranty period, 5 years has become the pretty well standard minimum warranty period for LED products. Then it covers CCT, coordinated color temperature, which means how white is white. Is it let's say 2,700 degrees Kelvin, which mimics incandescent, or is it 4,000 or 5,000 degrees Kelvin, which is very white, almost leading into the blue-white. This way, the potential user can understand what they're getting. And it'll cover other things. There are two levels. In this case, there's a DLC standard and a DLC premium, which is approximately 25 to 30% more efficacious. So the utilities can have two levels of rebates if they choose to. And of course, primary uses. And this was a snapshot when there were 185,000 products listed. In this case, it happens to be the model number, who the manufacturer is, what the brand name is. Again, this is not a commercial for anybody. This happens to be the first page on the list, so it begins with A. This was American Electric Lighting, manufacturers, Acuity brands, and what is a primary use. So how about the development of the policy? Well, first, the policy request is identified, it's researched, and it's understood. The request can come from a utility, or it may even come from a stakeholder. Maybe a stakeholder has a new type of a product, and they see it proliferating across multiple manufacturers, and they'd like to get it included in the program. A draft policy is developed and is circulated to the DLC Technical Committee, which is composed of some of the utility members. Technical Committee gives feedback, either, you guys are smoking something, we don't want to do that, or, yeah, that makes sense. Now let's change that and get a draft for stakeholder review and approval. So it'll go out now to all the utility companies as the first step, and then stakeholders' public meeting, where manufacturers and other interested parties can participate. All the stakeholder input is gathered, it's summarized, and it's discussed with the technical committee. Now and then the revisions are made based on the stakeholder and technical committee input, and a new policy is released. This is a little different than the pure consensus process, where people who are members of the consensus body vote. If they vote no with a technical reason, that's got to be addressed and resolved and possibly recirculated. This is not the ANSI consensus process. This is more of a closed process, but they're making it as open as they can given the structure of DLC. There are two types. A technical requirement revision is a review of all the categories and the parameters, and it typically makes the requirements more stringent, more efficacious. The other type is a technical requirements development. That may be creation of new categories, take the wish list from everybody and prioritize it and decide what categories, if any, are going to be added or changed. And this only occurs if there's a member need and the program capacity to do it. So a bunch of things in program operation that we talked about. They have a lab policy where your products you have to submit data from listed laboratories. You can't go to Joe's Corner Acme Laboratory and say, okay, here's my test report. It's got to be from what they consider to be an accredited laboratory. Typically, NavLab is well accepted. And they have stringent uses on the use of the DLC logo, because the logo adds credibility to a product, and they're concerned about it being misused. A manufacturer can't arbitrarily say this applies to all my products when it may only apply to some of them. So again, this is a snapshot. 2014, there were 52,000, all the way to 2017. You see these drops right here and right here? That typically occurs on December 31st of a given year when the requirements are revised. And products had a year's notice and they get delisted. So there's a drop off here, then a rebound, back up again. Either with new products or manufacturers waking up and saying, well, what did I do? I didn't get done in time, or I forgot about it, and they get their revised products relisted again. And the same thing, of course, here. This was a big drop off. But then you can see what happened. Whoop, back up again. So updates in the program. I mentioned the premium classification, and utilities asked for that. They said, we're willing to give higher rebates if we can get a premium classification. So the numbers were developed for the premium. And then these 37 product applications were categorized into 4 categories and subcategorized with 15. Well, how about a surveillance testing policy? If a manufacturer submits data from a lab, says, I have a good product, it meets all the requirements, how do we know that that manufacturer is going to continue to meet all those requirements? We'd like to believe that each manufacturer is very zealous in maintaining product performance in their products. Sometimes changes occur, either by intent or not by intent. Maybe something happens in the manufacturing process. Maybe a component changes, something changes, and the unit can really no longer meet the requirements. So there's going to be a surveillance testing policy to validate the data that's listed. And it's equitable across all manufacturers. and members are allowed to submit challenges. If manufacturer A in their own lab has been testing products from a bunch of different manufacturers, as we all did, they go, hey, manufacturers C products don't meet their specs. Now they can go to DLC and say, here's what we found, and DLC will take a look at the data. So the current proposals, the comment period just ended, had three things: technical requirements in table 4.2, color tuning policy. Color tuning is a big thing. Anybody get into color tuning yet, their specs? It's becoming more and more prevalent for a whole host of reasons. One is human-centric lighting is starting to show that in schools you need different color temperatures or different levels of light at different times of day for the student body to wake them up, keep them alert, calm them down, getting ready for a test. In a kindergarten, maybe you want the kids to take a nap in the afternoon, and lighting can help. And then, of course, DC power distribution and power over Ethernet. These are new things in the lighting world. Maybe you don't need conduit, or you don't need Romex. You can use Cat5 instead. Another thing is that these are all for LED products, LED equivalents of T5s, T5 high outputs, and hazardous locations. Again, the draft was issued last November. They've discussed it with the technical committee, and it's not the end of April yet, but we're expecting to see adjusted proposals coming out. So if you have new T5 requirements, what do you do with the existing ones that are listed? Do you give them a year to update, then knock them off the list? How about color temperature requirements? There are people who feel that 5,000 degrees Kelvin isn't high enough. I know one guy who has a company up in Wisconsin who has stated that he's put 8,000 degree Kelvin into an office and lowered the light level, lowered the power requirements. Productivity didn't suffer, people didn't get headaches, they're all happy. So there's discussion, right now the DLC requirements are capped out at 5,000 degrees Kelvin. So is that enough? How about CRI? There's an IES, Illuminating Engineering Society document called TM30. It differs from the classic color rendering index, which has 8 color palettes, pastels. TM30 has 99. And supposedly it's much better for LEDs in being able to communicate color. It's still controversial. A lot of manufacturers don't like it because it's more testing for them. So we'll see what happens. Right now, the DLC is not going to require, my understanding is they're not going to require TM30 color tests, but they may in the future. And there's a little concern about using the term hazardous in the descriptor for DLC, because now you're getting into potential safety issues, and certainly in the United States, that spells a potential for litigation. So DLC is a little concerned about, do they want to get into that situation and run the risk of being sued? Because they do not have deep pockets. Color tuning. Draft policy was issued in November. Commenters, again, discussions. And let's look at accommodating what we'll call dynamic color tuning. Later this year, go out for stakeholder again. It's a process. DLC doesn't try and compress or rush the process and miss something. And if you just have pure white, as we talked about earlier, maybe going from 5,000 to 3,000 degrees Kelvin, that's part of color tuning, but not all. If you really want to actually change colors, then you need RGB, which is red, green, blue systems. So you have 3 separate controls that have to be balanced to get any color you want. Okay, let's say you want to do that. Well, how much testing do you need to really understand the system performance? And how does this create implications for control strategies? and, well, whether and how to incorporate dimming. The most common method of dimming used right now in the US for lighting is 0 to 10 DC, right? Everybody use that? When you say 0 to 10 DC, do you really know what you're referring to? What standard? There are two standards out there. One is an IEC standard, which nobody really understands unless you're involved with the IEC. And the other is buried in an ANSI standard for fluorescent ballasts. It's an Annex A to ANSI C82.11. So we have a new ANSI committee called C137, and it's called Lighting Systems. The first project is C137.1, which is to create a good, up-to-date standard for 0 to 10 or 1 to 10 DC, or dimming. And that has been balloted upon. It's in comment resolution. There's been a lot of turmoil during the resolution process because some of the manufacturers are saying, well, this is what our product does today. We want this product to meet it. And I'm on the committee with these folks, and my view is a little different. We should be developing a forward-looking spec or standard, and what's really best for the industry, and then maybe say it will apply in 12 to 18 months to give everybody a chance to modify their product. But many of the manufacturers don't like that approach because it's going to take their engineering resources away from new products going to modifying existing products. So a lot of turmoil going on. That's the fun of standards development. DC and power over Ethernet, again, new in lighting. Both of these are interesting concepts. And if you separate the world of retrofits from the world of new construction, they're totally different. In new construction, it's very easy to pull Cat 5 everywhere or pull your DC controls, whatever you need. In retrofit, it can be very challenging and very expensive to do this. So the question is it economically worth it? How about system losses? If you're going to put in DC, you bring AC into the facility, now you got to convert that to DC to distribute. There's some loss in that conversion. And you really need to take a look at, allow for that loss in your overall system efficacy or efficiency. If not, you can get fooled and you're not going to achieve the savings that you thought you would. How about the test protocol? What's the loading criteria for power supplies? 100% loading, 50% loading, 10% loading? And how about any line loss factors? Ohm's law is still valid. You've got resistance in the line. You're going to have some type of losses in the line. And how about if you have a luminaire that's not sold as part of a control system or power supply? How can you rate that? So the surveillance testing that I mentioned, that was finalized in December. Random sampling approach. I fly United, by the way, so I don't think it's random like United's was, but taking the lowest performing products in some cases, maybe occasionally the highest performing, any applications issues, or any stakeholders concern. So it's a semi-random approach. Pure random approach basically to me means you have a random number generator in the computer, everybody's got a number assigned to it, the computer pops out some numbers, whoop, those are the ones we're going to look at. This is not quite that random. And they just started the first cycle of product selection in March. So LEDs for general illumination really hit the market about 2008. In 2006, Jim Broderick of the Department of Energy called what we called a LED stakeholders meeting, standard stakeholders meeting in Washington. At that time, I was chairing the NEMA Lighting Systems Division, so I was one of the invited folks. But there were people from UL, from CSA, from IEC, from IES, from NEMA, whole alphabet soup of organizations invited. The goal was to define all of the different types of LED standards that were needed, and then at the end of the day, split that up so that there'd be no duplication of standards development, and the appropriate organization that had strengths and knowledge in that area would be the one responsible for developing the standards. And it worked. It created a roadmap for standards development. So 2008, we really began to see LEDs. Was anybody rich enough to buy an A19 LED in about 2008 or 9? Probably was about $45. And the joke was, if you had one in your house, when you moved, you would unscrew it and take it with you. Of course, now you can get A19 800 lumen, which is 60 watt equivalent for what? $1, $2 with the rebates. But because of the proliferation of LEDs and the fact that they are controllable, they like dimming, control and connectivity became the lighting industry's buzzwords. And of course, that led to the network lighting controls. The program, it's a DLC's program. It's tools and resources that will encourage widespread adoption of network lighting controls in commercial buildings. Now, this is not residential, this is aimed towards commercial. So the technical requirements have a comprehensive set that includes required, and we'll talk about this in a minute, required parameters, reported parameters. Each manufacturer gives a WebEx 2-hour presentation to those of us who are reviewing their application, which includes a presentation. Previously, we've had questions going back and forth and answers, and during the presentation, many times we bring up additional questions. And interviews with customers. You can't get something approved if it's still in the R&D lab. It's got to be actually commercialized. And that will eventually end up with a network lighting controls qualification product list with a lot of information on it so that the potential user, you're a commissioner, you're getting involved in specifying systems, you can look at this and say, okay, which system best meets my needs? Which has the parameters, the requirements, the performance that best meet my customer's needs? So what is a network lighting control system? It's a combination of sensors, networking interfaces, and controllers that affect lighting changes to interior luminaires, but doesn't include the luminaires themselves. So two key things out of that: interior, right now, not exterior, and doesn't include the luminaires. They can be on the component qualified product list. As I mentioned, the systems have to be commercially available, to be purchased with complete final documentation and literature ready available on the manufacturer's website or hard copy before they can be listed. Some manufacturers say, we'll do the commissioning of the lighting control system. Others say the contractor or commissioning agent can do it. Still others say, well, it's so easy, the end user can do it. Good luck. So DLC requires that the system's been installed in at least one actual field installation. And we'll talk to a customer. What happened during the installation process? Did you have any issues? Are you satisfied with it? Does it have any shortcomings? Does it meet everything it's supposed to? As we saw when we looked at a little bit of the QPL, things are listed according to the system name, and if there are variations of configuration under a single name, that's a single system. If they're marketed under different names, if they're using different components by the same manufacturer, they have to be qualified separately because there may be some differences in performance. Right now, DC PoE-based lighting controls are not eligible to be qualified until the next version, which is targeted to be issued on June 1st of this year. So what do the manufacturers have to do? They have to review frequently asked questions, submit general information, submit required capabilities, submit reported capabilities. And again, these are the questions. They can be start out with very general questions. They include What are the required capabilities? What are the requested capabilities? What is the system? Education for the manufacturer who's applying. Now the general system information, that's the first phase, it's 25 questions. And these are very general questions. For example, if the system is a combination of components from multiple manufacturers, please provide a list of all the manufacturers. A controls company may not make all the components that go into the control system, but who makes them? What do their data sheets look like? And they'll include networking, oxy-sensing, daylight harvesting, high-end trim, so you can trim the maximum light level. Maybe you don't need it to go all the way up, so why have the capability put in a means of controlling the high end so it doesn't waste energy? How about zoning? How do you zone? What kind of zones? What's addressable? What kind of continuous dimming do you have? Make sure there's a 5-year warranty. Some manufacturers have a 3-year standard warranty and an extra cost option for the next 2 years. Right now, that's allowable as long as it's so stated in their information, so they don't hide that from anybody. Reported things, just type of user interface, luminaire level control, scheduling, load shedding, plug load control. These are just reported capabilities. But typically, things that are on this revision's reported capability list, some of them for the next revision will flip over to become required. And again, these will be discussed with all the stakeholders. And there are 94 questions on the required capabilities. So they get really drilled down information. To review an application takes anywhere from 10 to 15 hours, just reviewing it. And there are 50 questions on the reported capabilities. So these are the 16 systems that are now qualified in alphabetical order. And you can see some of the major companies are on here. Acuity, Cree, Daintree is now owned by GE, is a smaller company. Eaton, Enlightened is independent. Ideal, Lutron, Osram, Philips, RAB. And there's one more under review. When we posted this, there are now 2 more that have been submitted and will be reviewed. So the revision cycle starts every June. They release a version, start the new cycle. Allow time for February for stakeholder input, and then when the revision comes out, there's a 1-year grace period for the existing products. So well in process of requirements 2, which very well may expand to exterior, may require energy monitoring capabilities, scheduling maybe, localized processing, and maybe we refine the reported characteristics to make it clearer. Now, we've heard statements that lighting control systems can save 40% or more of lighting energies. Well, you've got 2 schools there. One school says, yeah, you're comparing that to going from fluorescent to LED with controls. The other school says, well, if I put in LEDs without controls, I'm not going to save 40% more by going to controls. It'll be a lot lower savings. Of course, there are other non-energy benefits to customers in terms of customer satisfaction and controlling light levels, et cetera. But right now, the utilities are saying that less than 1% of the projects they've seen incorporate network lighting controls. So it's an area for potential rapid growth. So to address that, there's now a data collection and analysis project that will collect data from third-party studies and from manufacturers so we can get more factual data on what actual energy savings are from controls. So, looking in the not-so-far future, this is my crystal ball. We're seeing an increase in vertical integration, certainly in the lighting world. Companies that were component suppliers, GE, Philips, Osram, have split. They've gotten rid of a lot of their component divisions, and now what are they doing? They're into systems. So my prediction is that if you're doing commissioning only today, you'll eventually move to design, to specify, and to even build and commissioning, including lighting. So we know that knowledge is power. So knowledge about these lighting incentive or rebate programs based upon DLC and network lighting controls and embraced by your electric utility in the rebate program is power. And that's power for you and your businesses and will enable you to better serve your clients and customers.